Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Hope you're getting some reading in during this time of year, wherever you may be. I know hopefully some of you are from south of the equator, so you might be having last vestiges of winter are happening for you, whatever that may look like. And I know for those in the northern hemisphere, it's the last vestiges of summer and warm, depending on where you are in the northern hemisphere. um, Anyways, the book I'm going to review today is The Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman. She previously wrote a book called The Finishing School, which I have read, and she wrote a book that is a sequel to this called The Forgotten Daughter a few years later. This one was published in 2018, so it's still fairly new. I'll give you the synopsis and then we'll move forward. In 1950s Quebec, the French and English tolerate each other with precarious civility, much like Maggie Hughes' parents. Maggie's English-speaking father has ambitions for his daughter that don't include marriage to the poor French boy, Gabriel Finet, on the neighboring farm. But Maggie's heart is captured by Gabriel. When she becomes pregnant at 15, her parents force her to give up baby Eloise up for adoption and get her life back on track, quote unquote. Eloise is raised in Quebec's impoverished orphanage system. It's an insecure enough existence that takes a tragic turn when Eloise, along with thousands of other orphans in Quebec, is declared mentally ill as a result of the new law that provides more funding to psychiatric hospitals than to orphanages. Withstanding abysmal treatment at the nuns' hands, Eloise finally earns her freedom at 17 when she is thrust into an alien, often unnerving world. Maggie, married to a businessman who is eager to start a family, cannot forget the daughter she was forced to abandon, and a chance reconnection with Gabriel spurs a wrenching choice. Over the years, Maggie's and Eloise's lives have intertwined but never touched. They are finally brought together when Maggie goes in search of her long-lost daughter, reclaiming the truth that has been denied them both. I gave this book a 4.5. I really quite enjoyed it. What I enjoyed about it, I think, was the depiction more of the quote-unquote orphanage system during the Duplessis and subsequent years. Even though as horrific as it was, I think it was a really well crafted tale, and it was well told. Like, it was very well, it was very much intriguing. I had read the sequel to this book, The Forgotten Daughter, but I think a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I read it. I didn't know it was part of a series. I saw it on, believe I saw The Forgotten Daughter on, let's see, and I was intrigued by it. So I read the description, I thought I was intrigued by it. And then I found out there's this book. I hadn't gotten around to it. And I had requested it a number of times through my system, and finally it came out for one of my book clubs. So I was able to read it. To say I enjoyed it, I think would be, I don't know. It's hard to describe it because I think when you enjoy something, when someone is being abused and neglected and forced into basically slave labor, I think is wrong. I think children, the most vulnerable, who are among the most vulnerable, should be taken care of and should not be declared mental patients. And trust me, that's not been the case since. I think sometime in the 1970s it changed, and I'm not sure exactly what happened with this declaration. I think as news filtered out in the 70s and 80s, I imagine things filtered out and it all changed. But it's a really interesting story. It's a really good mother-daughter story, really, because it intertwines both Maggie and Eloise's stories at the same time during the same time period. So when you're, yeah, you get alternating chapters, but you get the same time period. It's not a, no, it goes forward in time for both storylines. I don't know how to describe the ending without giving away the story. You have to read it to understand the ending. So if you have read it, so it is somewhat of a happily ever after, I would say, for Maggie and Eloise, but it's a journey. Let's just say that. The reason I'm shining is it's really hot today when I'm recording this, and I don't have my AC on at the moment. So I really do recommend this book to read about a very horrific period in Quebec and Canadian history. It is a lot like Orphan Train by, what's her name? Elizabeth Baker Klein, I think that's what her name is. I can't remember. I'll just look it up here, really quick. I also really like that story, as you know, because I read it earlier this year. Just gotta go back. And I like that it takes a while to. By Christina Baker Klein. That's Christina Baker Klein. Yeah, it's a similar type of story, but this one doesn't go back and forth in time. This one time marches along. So you see both Maggie and Eloise in a similar time period. So if you enjoy historical fiction, particularly Canadian historical fiction, or you're looking for a historical fiction that takes place in somewhere place other than England or the, well, I should say the UK or the United States, want something different, I would recommend checking this out. It does not deal with World War II, except maybe in a sort of roundabout way, because it starts in 1940. It really starts, yeah, well, no, it's post-war. It's a post-war book. So it mainly takes place in the 50s and 60s, the bulk of the story. A good chunk, part of the story does deal with the FLQ crisis, sort of in a roundabout way. I think The Forgotten Daughter deals more directly with the FLQ crisis. I can't recall that. So hopefully I can get around to that soon and I can review that for you, and you can maybe hopefully compare and contrast. So that was Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman. I hope you pick this up. It's a really good tale. It's a really good story. And it's a really sad story because it's true. This really did happen. I really did not like, if I have one conundrum that I think that I did not like about this book, is that she did not offer an author's note in this book. My guess is maybe there's an author's note at the end of Forgotten Girl. I don't know. The Forgotten Daughter, I mean. And I'm just kind of thinking there isn't. Because it would be really useful if she did put a author's note in the back of this book. Because you end the story and then you go into acknowledgments. And I really wish she had delved more into the whole Duplessis orphans, which they were called. A lot of these children were not orphans, I should mention. They were given up by unwed mothers who could not afford, or, I mean, if you've watched the movie Philomena, you know what I'm talking about. Much like the Mary Magdalene houses in Ireland, there is a bit of a history because, yeah, and it is explained in some detail, in a little bit of detail in the book, but I wish she would have gotten into a little more detail in an author's note in this book. Otherwise it probably would have been a 5 for me. I really like it when authors who are writing historical fiction, they're writing a historical fiction book, have an author's note so that they can explain the situation of these sort of things that they're talking about. Because quite honestly, I had no idea about the Duplessis orphans. All I knew, I mean, from my very scant, somewhat in-depth Canadian history in university. And then I learned this in university. I didn't learn this. I may have learned it in high school. I'm not sure. But at some point, I know I learned about Marcel Duplessis and his absolute hold on the Catholic Church and how they had hold on schooling, on almost every aspect of life in Quebec up until his death sometime in the 1960s. And then you had this big revolution in the 60s and 70s that resulted in the FLQ crisis and the kidnapping and murdering of a British diplomat, and of the kidnapping, I believe, was that a Canadian? His name was Pierre Laporte, and that's all I know. I think he was a French diplomat. So I'm going into a bit of history here that is more dealt with in the second book, I believe, in The Forgotten Daughter. But I just wish she had. That is the reason. I mean, I guess I could give it a 4.75, but I think that's a major misstep on her and her editor's part, not putting an author's note into something that very few Canadians know about, let alone people outside of Canada. I mean, put an author's note in a book. Like, let people know about this. Like, let them know about the stranglehold that Marcel Duplessis had on Quebec for 20, 30 years. And, yeah, because I think many Canadians would be intrigued. I imagine you can Google Duplessis orphans, and I will actually provide a link for Duplessis orphans in the show note, in the description, so that you can actually go and look at it and see how horrific it was. It was even more, I believe, more horrific than is described in this book. So that was the Home for Unwanted Girls by Joanna Goodman, and I look forward to a much nicer book next time, I promise you. Talk to you soon. Bye.